Welcome to Exceptionally Speaking, the podcast where we explore how to better understand and support exceptional learners. I'm Dr. Meryl, and each week I sit down with dedicated educators, parents, and advocates to share real strategies, inspiring stories, and moments of hope. If you're enjoying these conversations or learning something new, please be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Today on Exceptionally Speaking, I'm thrilled to sit down with Jennifer Gottschalk, whose decades of experience in gifted education and passion for inclusive practices continue to inspire me and so many others. Jennifer is the chair-elect of the LGBTQ network for the National Association for Gifted Children and has been part of the Colorado gifted community for more than 25 years. She has presented both locally and nationally on the need for allyship and inclusive practices, bringing decades of experience as a teacher, counselor-trained educator, and advocate for exceptional students. Jennifer's early experiences in education sparked a lifelong commitment to serving gifted learners, not only in the classroom, but also at the district, state, and national levels. In this episode, we talk about how best to uplift gifted LGBTQIA+ youth, especially at the intersection of their exceptional learning needs and their identities. You'll hear Jennifer share practical strategies for allyship, examples of inclusive classroom practices, and insights into how we can advocate for exceptional students in today's ever-changing political environment. From the importance of representation and safe spaces to the role national organizations like the NAGC play in advocacy, Jennifer brings thoughtful, research-based, and deeply hopeful perspectives for educators, families, and allies. You can find more information about all our guests at hex24press.com. Please enjoy Exceptionally Speaking with Jennifer Gottschalk. Hey, Jennifer, it's so good to see you. Thank you for being a guest on Exceptionally Speaking.
Hi there. Good to be here.
I'm really excited to talk to you. I know this has been a long time coming, and I hope I can have you back a couple more times because we have plenty that we could discuss.
True.
But before we get into our topic today, I'd love for you to just share a little bit more about who you are and how'd you even end up working in gifted education?
Sure thing. So I'm from Omaha, Nebraska, and in Omaha Public Schools, there was a Superintendent's Advisory Council for Gifted Education. And so I started serving on that when I was 16 years old. The person who ran it for the superintendent was one of my mentors. He was my high school counselor. But he did something really smart, which was that he had students come with their parents. So we had students and parents speaking to topics of the day and our experience. And I guess that's the dangerous opportunity when you let somebody know, like me, that people will listen to you and that this is how policy can work. Well, then you end up with someone, 50 years later who's like, yeah, this is important. And I'm still talking about it. So it really goes back to when I was 16. I have a bachelor's in psych, a master's in counseling, and a master's in gifted education because, I spent most of fifth grade in the hall because I was naughty and I had done all the math and stuff. And so when I wanted to be a counselor, because I thought, I'll find more kids in the hall, I will help them, right? And two things happened. One is back in the day, so, I went to undergrad in Boston and then I moved to Colorado because as much as I love Nebraska, it's really humid there. And so in Colorado at the time, in order to be a school counselor, you had to have a teaching license in at least 2 years in the classroom. And I was like, okay. So I went and student taught, I got a teaching license, and then for good or for bad, I really fell in love with teaching. And so fast forward, I'm interviewing at a school who needs a self-contained gifted ed language arts in middle school, but they also had a counseling position open. And they said, you can interview for both. And then they said, go home and think about it. So I went home and thought about it. And I realized that why I wanted to get the kids out of the hall was because of the gifted experience that I had had. And if I could be a teacher, but with my counseling background, maybe that would make them feel seen and heard, and we could really make a difference. And so that was the 2001 school years. As a human, I started in gifted ed policy at 16. And as an adult teacher, I started in gifted education in the 2001 school year. That's always been the energy for me, is making a difference for that individual student who's right in front of me or that individual teacher who's right in front of me. But also I love to think about systems and I love to think about policies. So that's why I ended up working at the district and state level and, nationally these many decades of my career.
Yes. Well, I'm so excited that you landed in gifted education and how cool that you had that experience as a high schooler.
Right?
Even now, I think that's rare. And I know your district's doing some wonderful things to get more students involved as well. But how wonderful that you got to be part of that. And
it really was.
Springboard you into what you ended up doing in your career. So
yeah,
that's lovely. So I know our topic today is really focusing on how best we can support our LGBTQ+ youth especially when there's a lot of challenges and trials being put upon them right now, but a lot of allies wanting to help and support. So I'm really excited that we're talking about this so we can get information to people and uplift the student experience in a way that we can be more supportive.
Yes.
So I know that you're heavily involved in this youth support and also the chair-elect for the LGBTQ plus network for National Association for Gifted Children. I'd like to just start kind of at the beginning here. For our gifted students who identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community, they face challenges within their intersectionality of being an exceptional learner and then being part of this community. And so what do you see as they're navigating their identity? What unique needs or vulnerabilities are you seeing at this intersection?
There's a couple things we want to lean into right away. The first thing I want to point people toward, and I know you're going to link it in the show notes, is the work of Dr. PJ Cedillo, who has done a really nice developmental model for how we as adults support students developing in their giftedness as well as in their gifted LGBTQ kind of, like you said, intersection. So some of the challenges that our students face are the fear or the actual reality of violence and harassment or discrimination, and how we respond as adults is through providing a safe space where students feel seen, and then advocating and also supporting students and advocating for themselves. We're just local in the moment policies. And we can talk a little bit more about how to support your students getting all the sort of legal precedents they need to go in and have a conversation about who they can take to prom, for example. Another thing that's really interesting about our gifted LGBTQ plus populations, you think about gifted students in general have unique and unusual interests. And then what we see, according to Dr. Cedillo, is in our developing gifted youth, especially students who are younger, 9, 10, 11, 12, you see interests that are really across anything that would be in the gender spectrum. I think in 2025, we're seeing, anybody can be a chef, for example, or anybody can be a nurse. But if you are the GT facilitator or educator and you're hearing a student who's I want to be a cheerleader, and this student might be male presenting at this time or male assigned at birth or however you want to say, just keep your, like we already do as teachers, keep your neutral face on and be oh, okay, I want to hear more about that. Because there are 2 new male cheerleaders in the NFL, I think,
yes,
for the Vikings, if I'm remembering correctly. So so a piece of that gender varied interest and our behaviors is a part of your allyship work, is to lean in and be oh, I don't know about that. Tell me more. Then on your own, maybe just dig a little bit into what's happening. Because I don't know about you, Meryl, but my students always know more than I do because they have more time to go out in the world and whatever their corner of the internet is telling them. So I think just being open and aware and supportive, and then on your own, maybe you can need to think about where are these connections and these interests, these potential career options, etc. A third piece developmentally is where might role models exist for our gifted LGBTQ youth, and you as an advocate and you as an ally, keeping an eye out for who your students might look toward. So yes, that would be some research on your own, but it's not a hard research. So let's say you have a student who has recently come out to you as bisexual. And so you might think to yourself, do I know who that might be? Well, sure. Janelle Monáe, African-American, bisexual, female presenting, right? So it can also be fictional role models. So I once had a student come up to me with one of Rick Riordan's books. And this is just one of those bell just rang, heading off to class, walks up to me holding the Rick Riordan book and says, hey, I wanted you to know that I am also pan, like the character in this book.
Okay.
And I said, thank you so much for telling me. And let me know, and she was like, yep. And then just went about her business, 8th grade girl. But when I'm teaching teachers, I say, have books by people like Rick Riordan, who's won a Stonewall Award for the way he provides visibility for all different types of human beings, demigods, etc. Have those kinds of things in your classroom. Another great set of gender fluid, gender expansive is the wide world of manga or manga, should you choose to pronounce it that way. So just having either human adult role models where you're oh my gosh, I heard this great quote from Pete Buttigieg the other day. Just those little bits and pieces, like Candace Parker was picking yesterday on, Candace Parker is a famous WNBA player and college champion at Tennessee. So just calling out that I recognize this strong human being who's part of an organization that supports the LGBTQ community, those little bits and pieces signal that you are a person who is aware and supportive. So that's a huge thing that we can do as teachers is just who, did you have a quote from Harvey Milk? Did you have a quote from Alan Turing? Right? Like,
Yeah.
those kinds of things is isolation. So just like most of us as teachers do, we make sure that our students aren't alone, that they have someone who says hi to them every day. They have someone who says, oh, hey, I love your new shoes, or my gosh, this hair color is fantastic. How did you pick it, or whatever? Just that you're making sure that your students aren't isolated. And if they don't connect with you, then behind the scenes, who might they connect with that you could say, hey, Mr. So-and-so, I have a student who's really interested in nuclear engineering. Can I send him to you at lunch tomorrow just to hear more about whatever that is? The fifth thing that is called out, and this is also by Elena Treat, who's another researcher that from the LGBTQ network, incredible human, is that just like all gifted students, our gifted LGBTQ plus students have heightened sensitivities, but they're vigilant in the way that people are vigilant around, like I said earlier, the threat of violence and harassment, but also what they hear in the hall. The slurs they might hear in the hall between my class and your class, the heightened sensitivity about the 24-hour news cycle and the things that are being said or presented. And so anything you would normally do to help a gifted student around managing their heightened sensitivity to the world and the people around them is really useful for our gifted LGBTQ youth. And then the sixth thing that Alina and Dr. Alina Treat and Dr. Vijay Sadio call out is this idea that even now, we still sometimes lack or forget to use inclusive language. And so whatever that might be, the Oxford English Dictionary said they is a pronoun. And so for me as a teacher, when that happened, because I was an English teacher, right? I was like, okay, I will start practicing. And I practiced. I had a student. Again, I'm so grateful for the students who come into my life and together to navigate how best have this human feel supported and also help me make my practice better. Not because the kid's job is not to help me learn, but I'm saying like some of us as teachers, we become better or we learn because of a particular student in our class. So going back 10 years, I had a student who came up to me and said, look, I don't identify as a girl. So when you say, hey, all the girls at this table, I need you to, this student was like, that isn't me. So I said, okay, what would be better for you? And the student said, I'm just a person. So I would say all the people at this table go, or like Audrey person and also these people. And then this student had a hard time at home and just would come in for like a nice side hug. And that made a difference for that human. Like I'm very like, this is again, not an elementary person. I'm a secondary person. So I don't like a lot of hugging, but this is a person that needed just that physical reassurance of just like a shoulder pat or a side hug, eye contact, using the language that felt right to identify them as a human being. And so just that last part of how do you speak to people? Until my own personal child brought this to my attention. And then I had students like Audrey. I didn't see how gendered the world is. Old Navy is gendered. Elementary hallways are very gendered, and to a certain extent, middle school and high school. And so how do we just as adults recognize that and just sort of practice, not massive shifts, just small ones? So if that answers you, that's kind of a long answer to your question, but that's kind of how, those are those 6 things that I think are a great starting place when you're working your way towards strengthening your allyship behavior.
Thank you for that. I think that makes sense. And also a lot of what I heard you say is around that idea of students needing to have windows and mirrors, right? To be able to have the perspective of others, but also to be able to see yourself in whatever's happening in the classroom. And that truly is the teacher's responsibility to make sure that there's a place for that. And it feels really naturally embedded. And it's not some othering thing that's happening.
Yes. You have to if you really like Rick Riordan, you would have his books in your classroom. It wouldn't be like, whatever word you want to say for all you putting you in a box, kids. I got these 3 books on my shelf. Don't do that.
No, it's part of the collection. It's part of the human experience. And this is it here on my bookshelf. Yeah.
Right.
I think that's really important. And I know I've spent more time in the elementary world, and some of the small shifts I've seen really wonderful teachers take is like you're alluding to with grouping strategies and lineup strategies, not all the boys who XYZ or all the girls who do this. It's like, hey, who's got black shoes on? Line up, right? Like who has red on their shirt? Line up. Like what kind of things can you do? That's such a very small shift that can make a huge difference especially when we're thinking about gifted students thinking through their anxiety of the day and, but what am I going to do? When am I going to line up? What do I pick? Right.
Right.
But to just take that away. we have control over a lot of that.
We do.
So thank you for sharing those. I think that's really wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear more about what role you really see professional organizations like the National Association for Gifted Children and its LGBTQ plus network playing in countering some of the harmful narratives we're seeing and uplifting our affirmative practices really across the country.
Yeah. So NAGC, one of the things that I find very heartening is that their commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion continues. So it's still public facing on the NAGC website. NAGC conference, for those of you who don't know, is always in November. This year it's in Pittsburgh. If you were planning to present at conference, you had agreed to their diversity, equity, and inclusion policy. And then coming up, so our network, the LGBTQ plus network, was asked to update or draft a new policy statement around just what we were talking about. Like, what does NAGC believe around supporting the gifted LGBTQ students that are in all of our schools? And so that policy statement has been written, and wouldn't surprise anyone. It was too long. They exceeded the word count because they wanted to include all of the research. And so as a network, we're thinking through how, because to be fair, like a lot of policy statements are one pagers, right? So the one page will eventually be on the NAGC website, and I'll let you know because I'd love for you to link it. And then the supporting research might be hosted on our page inside NAGC, but I'll make sure you get that as well, because while there's not the vast body of research helping us all improve our practices around our gifted LGBTQ plus youth, there are research studies happening right now, and we want all of you who want to read them to be able to access them. So that's one piece, is NAGC is willing to say, hey, this is a group of human beings that we want to purposely call out as needing, deserving our support at the national level. The fact that we exist as a network is important. If for NAGC, a lot of people started as a SIG, a special interest group, which is what LGBTQ network was. And actually this year, coming up at conference is the network's 10th anniversary. So we're hoping to do like a little something to celebrate as well.
That's exciting. Yeah.
And we're also, just if I can brag for a second, we're the only network that raises monies. LGBTQ network has been advocating for raising money to send a gifted LGBTQ plus student to a summer camp or a summer experience, usually on a college campus that feels inclusive and supportive of all the intersection of their identities. And so that's the PRISM Award going forward. It's going to become more official. And each year, so last year in Seattle, we raised close to $3,500, and we feel, we feel really excited about that. And so the fact that NAGC understands and supports, like we get emails when they're scouting the location about, would this be a good space for the fundraising event is Drag Queen Bingo. So is this an okay space for this? So NAGC met with the leadership of our network to talk about hosting NAGC in cities that have policies that welcome all of our members. There was some consternation when we had our most recent meeting in Florida, because
I do remember that, yeah.
Because the policies of Florida, and this is not judgment, it's just fact, the policies in Florida don't support every single student, the rights of every single student or family that NAGC supports. And so that was our ask. And so we met with conference and NAGC leadership to talk about that. And I do think that we were heard. They have other constraints, obviously, around where they're active, gifted organizations at the state level, et cetera. But the fact that we even had the meeting, that they understood that was a conversation that we needed to have. And we were joined and supported by other networks like Arts, and a couple of other ones joined us as well. That was important. So that's a piece of the puzzle. Also, KEGT, our local Colorado, one of the strains that you can submit a proposal to is also LGBTQ. And I think just continually saying, like, look, this is a piece of practice where, just like if it's twice exceptional, or just like it's preschool, like we can grow our practice. Our supporting our gifted LGBTQ plus students is an important part of all of our ongoing education. So when we have a state or a national organization signaling that and supporting that, to me, that's a powerful message of inclusion and advocacy.
Yes. And I wonder too, I mean, I think we're fortunate to be in Colorado, but for our fellow educators that are working across different states that are implementing more harmful policy and practices, maybe it's a bit grounding to know that, hey, there are national organizations that are still remaining committed. And so although it may feel really bad and uncomfortable in their current state, to know that that's not the belief across the nation, across the world, that is isolated there, and that they can lean in more on the organizations outside of their state that are willing to to really offer up resources
Mhm.
and language to use in order to support our LGBTQIA plus youth.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm happy to hear that NAGC continues to be an outspoken support for our students.
Me too.
And I'm wondering too if you could share. I know we talked a little bit about some small shifts on an allyship for our LGBTQ plus youth. Do you have any other stories you might want to share on any policy shifts or classroom changes or school changes that you think might be worth talking about as people who are really interested and are allies but kind of don't know where to start?
Yeah, something I want to call out before we get into allyship per se is you might be familiar with the research of a husband wife couple whose last name is Gottman. And so a quote that I share with people from Dr. Julie Gottman is that during fight or flight, blood moves from the prefrontal cortex to the motor cortex. And so as a gifted teacher, or as a teacher who has a lot of gifted kids in your classroom, if you have a student who is feeling constantly in fight or flight, they may not be performing in the gifted range. And so this comes back to that piece, like, what can I do to put supports underneath my students who really need it so that we can really see what they can do? And so I just wanted to call that out as a keep your eyes and ears open. Like, we know that we have gifted and LGBTQ students who are referred to their schools, if you call it RTI process or their IMTSS process. But if they feel like they're under threat, or if they're actually under threat, or something in between there, we're not going to see a 5 on an AP test necessarily. And so just to throw that in the back of people's minds as they move forward in their allyship work. Some other things that are really cool that I want to call out. A resource I love to point people towards is the Pride Index. Have you and I talked about that before? Do you know about the Pride Index?
So tell me about it.
So the Pride Index is a nonprofit website that tracks college and university support of LGBTQ students. So if you are in a high school, I do a lot of my work in secondary. If you're in a high school and you have a student who is like, I'm a gay man and I want to be safe when I go to college, what might be some colleges that would be a good fit for me? You can pull up the Pride Index and look and see how the school has been rated. Now, one caveat is it is opt-in. My own children was wanting to go to University of Wisconsin. And I was like, well, I'm sure. I mean, Wisconsin, this is a liberal university, not on there. University of Wisconsin, like Whitewater, like some, because, the flagship is Madison. And then, so some of the other UW schools were in there, but not Madison. That doesn't mean it's not doing well on the Pride Index matrix. It's just that they didn't opt in. But to me, the fact that University of Nevada, Reno opted in, I'm like, heck yeah. Because I have a cousin who is trans at that university who is thriving because of the policies that are supportive of her experiences as a trans woman. So I love the Pride Index and I love that it continues to update, etc. Also, I tend to point people towards like the larger policy watch groups. So here's the thing. You have to think about the student or the family. Like, sometimes I want to be like, is there an adult who's going to be able to read this and think to themselves, okay, here's the bright spots and here's the information I want to share with my student? Or is this a student who can navigate that for themselves? So I always just say, maybe don't give this to a 9-year-old. Like think
Sure.
through. But the policy watch groups are tracking, like the ACLU has a tracking human rights campaign does. Here's one that I really love is the Kaiser Family Foundation. So something that not everyone knows is that Kaiser as a nonprofit has been done some of the leading work in care for the trans community. And so they are keeping track of health policy in a way that can be helpful for families. And then there's one that was new to me when I was looking that's called the Movement Advancement Project. And they also do some policy tallying. And then, of course, GLAD, which is a long time advocacy organization for the LGBTQ plus community. And then there's like Land Legal Aid Society and so on. So another thing that's really helpful, I think, from an advocacy lens is what's happening locally. So whenever I'm presenting at a local conference, because I've presented outside of Colorado, I always go and see what organizations might exist. So it's sort of like a state level version of what Mr. Rogers always told us, which is look for the helpers. So it may be that there isn't state policy, but there's a couple of states that have developed free lending libraries of all the books that have been banned about the
Amazing.
LGBTQ plus experience. And I always think of like some of the southern states. So I've seen this, I think Louisiana, I think Alabama, I think Florida. So, some ways it's back to, the last century where everything's word of mouth. But there are thriving and vibrant LGBTQ plus LGBTQ plus communities in every city around our nation. Some are just a little bit harder to find than others, but they're there and they kind of all talk to each other. So here's a fun thing that I just learned. So I was back in Seattle visiting my older, I'm wearing my Seattle Storm shirt. So Meryl, here's something that's really cool that's happening when you think about like adulthood and what can I look forward to? There's this long-standing idea of lesbian bars as community centers. And then there was a story in the New York Times maybe 3 or 4 years ago tracking the decline of those kind of community spaces. Well, they're resurging. So I went to a new place in Seattle that's only been open a couple of years. And then I was talking to one of the hostesses, and where was she from? Colorado.
Cool.
But she lives in
Yes.
Seattle now. And she was saying, oh yeah, there's another one of us in Seattle, but they're more of a restaurant. And then I said, well, our national conference is going to be in Pittsburgh. Do you have a sister establishment in Pittsburgh I could point people toward? And she said, I'll go find out for you. So like, I guess I'm bringing that up to say like, people are still thriving. People are still connecting. Businesses are still being started. And so maybe go find out or just do some light Googling, go see and then I guess I would love to call out the WNBA in general. Like it's so affirming for our queer community, for our LGBTQ plus families. There's been some wonderful things that have been supportive through the Olympics. So sports has been an interesting foreground in anti-discrimination in general. The policies around trans athletes are less hopeful right now, but I try to think of the broader picture. Where we are is accepting all of our LGBTQ plus folk in athletics is still doing all right. Trans policies it's so hard because this is a very small number of human beings that are being targeted excessively by legislation. So I think sometimes if I had a 17-year-old who wanted to come and talk to me about this, I'd try to put it in terms of the math and say, and the other piece of the math that is important is almost all these policies are being challenged. So they're being challenged legally, they're being challenged by protests, they're being challenged in a couple of different ways. So again, look to the helpers. Does this policy sound terrible? Is the wording really hard to hear? Yes, it is. Here's what the lawsuit challenging it says. Here's who the people are that brought the lawsuit. And just also say, and that could also be you or it could not be you. Because I do think a tricky thing for our gifted students is they feel a burden that they have to do something. That part of your gift identity means you have to go into leadership. You have to excel. But that isn't always the case. The case can just be like, could you donate money? Could you send a postcard to a legislator? What are the small actions you could take as a human that might help you feel like you're contributing to the solution? I got a little bit rambly, but hopefully that answered the question. There's a lot. There's a lot with advocacy and policy.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And a good thing to point out where if you find one community center or place that is affirming, that is a good place to ask about what other places are you guys connected to, especially when you're in states where it's maybe not going to be as visible. Once you find one, that can open up the network to everybody else who's involved, other community centers, other organizations. And so if you're looking for more community and more ways to help, that starting with that one place that you know of and talking to those people who work there and volunteer there is a really good place to start.
Mm-hmm.
And that there is hope, and that regardless of the policies that we're seeing be presented, that it isn't just everyone looking around waiting for it to pass, that there are plenty of people who are saying, absolutely not, this is discriminatory, this is not okay, and really moving forward to help. What else do you think would be helpful to share on how best we can help support our LGBTQ plus students?
Something that not seems to surprise people outside of this work is that depending on when you came into your acronym space, the Q sometimes stood for questioning, right? And there is data to show that our gifted students question identity sooner. And I mean like 8 or 9 years old.
Yes. Yep.
And sometimes younger. Like when you talk to students and they'll say like, yeah, I've known this about myself since I was 6. Like one of my friends was like, I always dating myself a little bit. She was like, I always played Luke Skywalker in our play. I was always rescuing Princess Leia. I wanted a princess for myself. I did not want to be a princess, So I would say for our folks that are in even elementary classrooms, if you have a student who walks up to you and says, I am actually a girl, saying you're too young to know that is not maybe the most supportive answer, but you could say, oh, tell me more. I'm curious. But like little kids, Meryl, and you know more than I do, but they'll tell you that in a really public place, like in the lunch line. And you might be like, hey, friend, I want to hear more about that, but after lunch, so can we talk like after lunch or, try to help that friend have a little bit of boundary space. I had a really very subtle bi pride sticker on my left. It was a death's head moth, but it was in the colors of the bi flag. And this 9-year-old that had been called out to me with writing goes, "Is that the bi pride flag?" And I was like, "Yes, it is." Like, because I always have pride stickers somewhere around me so the kids know that I'm a safe human, but I had not had a child that young say that. So it worked, because then this little friend was like, "Well, I think I am pan." And I was like, "Okay, like, let's tell me about your writing," right? Like, because I wasn't there to, talk to her about her identity. The fact that I had that place and I was just like accepting of like, I hear your words and how you view yourself. And I hear you're writing a story about ponies.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So I think don't be surprised by the questioning, and then the other thing that and that I think some of our listeners are really familiar with is that our gifted students have such big hearts and they really want to change the world for the better. Like the minute they see the wrong, they want to fundraise, they want to protest, they want to have a lemonade stand. And so helping your students navigate those feelings of I want to make the world better is important. And depending on the states where you live, you may or may not have a lot of bandwidth to be able to do that. So I do think partnering with families as much as possible. I mean, I've had a lot of like, "Hey, do your grown-ups know about," or I'm like, I have to send them a note if you want to borrow these particular books. And they're like, "Oh yeah, my parents let me read whatever I want." I said, "Perfect. So I'm just going to send this home and then we're good to go." But so take care of yourself as an adult in terms of the rules of wherever you are, but also be available as a resource and as a human when someone shares information with you. We're really fortunate in Gifted Ed. We have a great speaker named Dr. Matt Zakreski that has done a lot of work around the psychological development of gifted students. And he basically says something super simple, like, it does no harm to just believe the kid. How hard is that? I think it doesn't mean harm to you, or however he says it, but like, just be open, accepting, and believing that that's the space. And I also think, like, as a middle school teacher, I mean, I like to think I have pretty a good amount of neuroplasticity myself, but like when you stand in the hallway in middle school and one day is dinosaur t-shirt day and the next day, like one of my students wore like a pleather like corset to school, I was like, okay, like, because, right, we just accept that we are trying things out. We're figuring things out. I'm not saying, oh, someday you won't want to wear dinosaur t-shirts anymore, or someday you might not wear corsets to school. But I'm just like, hey, is that a new outfit? Like,
Yeah.
just being supportive of who that human is in that moment in front of you, because they're doing their best. They're doing their best to show up and try. Having that sort of loving kindness in your heart about whatever that human is bringing to you today is a great place to start. And I think you can do that no matter where you live and no matter what grade level or content you teach.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that if a student shares something about themselves with you, the answer is thank you for sharing. And really, it's showing that that person trusts you as an adult. And it doesn't mean that you need to do something in that moment or solve something. That's not what's happening. They are just sharing a piece of you with them.
That's
and
right.
that's really powerful. It's a wonderful moment to have with a student.
It is.
So thanks for sharing that. As listening to you talk, it had me remembering about an experience I had when I taught 5th grade. We were in an IB school, and there's kind of a culmination of projects at the end of the year where it's a community-facing project and multiple student groups across the classroom. They had to do something to affect the community. Well, I had a couple students come to me and say, hey, we want to raise money for LGBTQ plus youth. I said, great, let's figure out how to do this. They wanted to get bracelets made. They wanted to sell these bracelets, like have rainbow bracelets, right? And so that's what we did. But there was an element of we needed to present this to the whole student body. And by we, I mean them. I'm not presenting it. These are the students presenting it, right? And so we had the student body split up into like K2 and 3-5 to present. And I remember my principal coming to talk to me, and this is probably, I don't know, 2014 or something, come to talk to me and be like, hey, I don't know if we can do this presentation for the younger kids. And I'm like, why? Why can't we say, here's the organization we are raising money for, and here's how we're doing it? And I understand the principal was like, I'm worried about parents coming in saying XYZ. I'm like, and there are also gay parents who are going to be
so thankful that we are representing their family through this process. And so, no, we're going to continue. So the principal wasn't telling me I absolutely couldn't, but he was definitely pushing a little bit. And had I backed down, he would have loved if I would have backed down,
Right.
because
For
that
sure.
would have made it much better for him. But I didn't. And guess what? It was wonderful. And we didn't get any negative feedback. And we raised a lot of money and donated it. And those kids had a wonderful time through that experience and getting to go in front of their entire school and talking about it. So
Mhm.
I think, that was a lesson for me in, when you're in a situation that positionality is affected,
Mhm.
and that's your boss questioning what you're
Mhm.
doing,
Mhm.
that it really is worth it to push back and talk through the why and I understand your concern, and let's talk about what's actually positive about this.
Mhm.
And sure, let's prepare for the best way to talk to parents if we get any adversity. And we're still going to do this. We're still
Mhm.
going to do this. So I hope that laid a little bit more of a foundation at that school and with that principal to feel more comfortable with moving ahead in that way.
Mhm.
But not necessarily comfortable on my end to have to push back on my boss, but
Right.
it was worth it. It was
Right.
worth it.
Right. And the kids learned that, like, us modeling advocacy in those small ways, it really matters. Yeah, I have a student that was upset about something that the front office was doing, and I coached her, like, okay, you're going to write a letter. Here's how this is going to work. And then she was able to speak to the assistant principal. She did not get what she wanted changed, but she had the experience of, talking with a, trusted adult, I guess that would be me, thinking through how she was going to approach her argument and then taking it to, leadership or the person in power. And I just saw her on LinkedIn, and she's now a lawyer for people with disabilities. And I was like, oh, right,
Amazing.
right. So that was kind of, I'm not saying I kicked that off, but I'm saying she had that experience early enough in middle school that maybe it was something formative. She thought, yeah, I want to be the person who helps people who see the thing that might need to be changed, and I want to be that legal advocate for them. So I do think what you
Yes.
did was important. We never know what kind of seeds we're planting, and seeds of acceptance and seeds of visibility are right now more important than ever for our gifted LGBTQ plus students.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up here, I love to ask our guests just really, what's bringing you hope? I know there's a lot of heaviness around this topic, but I truly see so many allies for LGBTQ plus youth. And so what's really bringing you hope for even gifted education becoming more inclusive and affirming?
Gosh, there's actually a lot of things. I take so much hope from my colleagues who are doing research around the gifted LGBTQ plus community. A person that helped write the position paper, I think I mentioned her earlier, Dr. Orla Dunn, she's actually in Ireland. So it's not just the research happening in the US, research that's happening in other parts of the planet, if you will. And speaking of other parts of the planet, I see policies changing in countries people never thought policies would change around. Same-sex marriage, for example. Um, and I think when I talk to students who identify as Gen Z, because Gen Alpha is just kind of come on up, but Gen Z is like, kiss who you want to kiss, date who you want to date. I care about, they talk about the receipts. Like, I care about what this person has done or not done. That's what's important to me versus who they want to hold hands with or marry. Or they might think of who they want to hold hands with, marry as an asset towards the work, if it's relative to the work that person is doing. So talking with this current generation of students has made me really hopeful, and seeing some of the student leadership who is not asking, but demanding for equitable access for all humans to resources, to academic strength, moving forward, to have growth available to them in whatever way that might be. To me, that's giving me a ton of hope. Like, even though I work sometimes at the district levels in state, I try to get time with students at least a couple times a month, because what they are seeing and doing is really wonderful. There's something I want to point people toward. It's not just specific to this topic, but in general, is the National School Redesign Showcase is a nonprofit initiative. It's a policy center now based in DC, but it's part of Hopkins. So Hopkins has a school of ed that has a campus in DC, and Colorado has had students participate in the National School Redesign Showcase, but there are kids from all over the states doing this. And a lot of their redesign efforts are specifically around inclusion. So when we think about back to that initial challenge of isolation, I feel like our current students are aware of this, and they're thinking it through their own lens of what does the opposite of isolation look like, and how can we speak to how we want schools redesigned to make sure that this is not going to be as great of a problem moving forward. if that makes sense. So I think that's just seeing what the students are doing and how they are actively working to shape their future. That gives me a lot of hope.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And I'll link that information as well. Thank you so much for being on the episode today. I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I would love to have you back. I think we could talk a lot more about this, but wide variety of topics within gifted education. So thanks for spending some time with me today.
Well, thanks for highlighting this topic. It's so crucial. And I'm really grateful for my opportunity through this leadership work to speak about it. So just thank you so much.
Thanks.
This episode of Exceptionally Speaking is brought to you by Hex 24 Press, where education meets imagination. I founded Hex 24 Press in 2024 to uplift educator voices and provide a publishing home for myself and other educators to bring our work into the world. You can find more information about today's guests, including links to their resources and services, at hex24press.com. Thank you for supporting educators, independent creators, and small business. We're so glad you're here.